Is 140 mils of travel really enough for an e-bike? I think it can be, especially when paired with a lightweight motor system. A bike can absolutely ride above its travel numbers if the suspension is set up right and the rider is willing to push it. I've actually taken this Nebo Peak on some trails where most people would consider it to be very undergunned. Today, I'll show you how I've set up this bike, what makes it unique, and why it's changed the way that I think about mid-travel bikes. The most common comment that I've received through all the content that I've put out about this bike has been about the amount of travel and wondering if it's enough, which is a super valid question. For starters, this bike has a 150 mil travel fork and it's got 140 mils of rear travel. Over the past few seasons, I've been having a ton of fun overbuilding bikes in the 120 to 130 mil travel range, tossing downhill casing tires on them and just absolutely thrashing them. But it's been a while since I've had a proper mid-travel bike like this Nebo Peak and my Derailleur Peak, which I built up earlier this year as well. Since it's been a minute since I've had a proper mid-travel bike, I was really curious to find the ceiling of this Nebo. And as of today, the ceiling that I found is super high, and that largely comes down to access. Given that this bike has the pedal assist from the motor, I've just been able to explore more than I had been on the Derailleur Peak earlier this year. With the Derailleur, I was riding that like I would a 140, 150 mil travel trail bike. I wasn't pushing it too far beyond its means, but with this bike, I'm able to just, ride a little longer, ride a little farther, be a little bit more curious, and I've just been able to explore some gnarlier trails, and I've mostly been riding this on our local shuttle loop here and riding downhill trails on it. So I've really pushed this bike to the limit and it's really, really impressed me. At the moment, I ride just about every trail that I can access by pedaling on this bike, and it's been absolutely blowing my mind and changing the way that I think about the possibilities of a mid-travel bike. The only exception to that is there's a few trails that I reserve strictly for a full-on downhill bike on our local shuttle loop, which I can access on this, but I've been choosing not to ride those. But the ceiling is super, super high, and that really comes down to, for one, my suspension setup, and for two, just my overall rider confidence. So let's dive into this. So to start things off, I am 5 foot 11 inches tall and weigh about 175 pounds. So you can have those for a reference point. Frame size is the size large. Rocking the long chainstay setting, so we're 439.7 chainstay, 474.3 reach, 629.3 stack. I've also got the setup with dual 29-inch wheels. We'll come back to all those numbers in just a second when we talk about the cockpit, but for now, let's take a look at my suspension. For the rear shock, we've got the Marzo Bomber Air. We're running 210 PSI in there with a 0.4 spacer. I'm running 3 clicks from open on the rebound, and I run the compression dial about a third of a turn from open. For the fork, we have a 150 mil travel Marzo Super Z. I've got 80 PSI in there with 3 volume spacers, 3 clicks from open on the rebound, 5 clicks from open on high speed compression, and 7 clicks from open on the low speed compression. Overall, this suspension setup is just barely progressive enough for some of the big compressions that I face, and that is 100% intentional. Given the 140, 150 mil travel numbers of this bike, I really need to make sure I'm using as much of that travel as often as possible to make sure my ride is as smooth as possible and I have as much traction as possible. All the good things. Now, setting up a shorter to mid-travel bike is more challenging than a long travel bike because that adequate window of travel usage just gets smaller, smaller, and smaller because you want to be using as much of that travel as possible, but you don't want to be bottoming out. So that window just gets really, really narrow in contrast to like a 200 mil travel downhill bike where you got a lot of room to play with. So on this bike, kind of my theory is I like to ride it with as slim amount of volume spacers as possible. I only add them if needed. I'm right on the cusp of needing a 4th volume spacer in the fork. I'm still running just the 3 to try to make it happen. So in some instances, I am kind of riding around big compressions, trying to smooth them out as much as possible. That's where rider ability comes into managing a short to mid-travel bike. Is a lot of that is rider input. Of course, a longer travel bike is going to give you way more forgiveness. There's no question about that. You can make do on a 140, 150 mil travel bike if you're up for it. Suspension setup plays a massive role in that, but so does your rider input as well. Just a quick extra note on that same topic. The managing the travel numbers, so in this case the 140, 150, that's in regards to really pushing the limits on this bike and riding it in terrain that it's not necessarily designed for. Of course, this bike is going to absolutely eat up the terrain it's more intended for absolutely perfectly. But for me, I like taking a bike like this, tossing really heavy casing tires on it and pushing it beyond maybe its intended limits, and that's where the rider ability really comes into play. And of course, when you match that rider ability with a really solid suspension setup, you're going to find a really happy place with your bike. Since we're on the topic of suspension, it's also really important to look at the tires I'm running. So that's your first form of suspension. So in the back, we've got the DHR downhill casing, and in the front, we have the High Roller 3 double down casing. I run 23 PSI in the front and about 25 to 26.5 in the rear. That's mostly just trail dependent. If I'm riding something that is more straightforwards, could be super rocky, but there's no aggressive turns, I'll run more like 25. But if I'm riding a trail that's more of a flow trail with some really aggressive, sharp berms, for sure gonna go up to 26.5 just so it doesn't roll around quite as much. So that is the tire setup of choice on the Nebo. Going back to the reach and stack numbers that I mentioned earlier, so 474.3 on the reach, 629.3 on the stack, which gives us a ratio of 1.33, which I'm pretty happy with. So I didn't go kind of anything too wild with this setup. It's definitely on the higher end, but nothing too crazy. And looking at that reach stack ratio has been a really cool thing that I've been looking at on pretty much every single bike that I've been riding for the last 2 years. I think it can give you a really solid sense of how the bike's gonna feel before you even build it up. So it's something I'm looking into, doing more research, and there will be some more content coming about in the future. If that's something you've looked into, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. So now let's take a look at the bar stem and spacer setup. So we've got the RaceFace turbine bar, 40 mil rise, 780 mil width. I've got 32 mils of spacers underneath the stem, and I am running a 32 mil length stem. 32 mil length stem is a bit of a questionable decision. I just wanted to try it out. And to be honest, the 40 mil stem I had on here was black. This one is the RaceFace Cash Money color, and it goes really sick with the build. So yeah, there's multiple forces kind of leaving the stem on there. It helps the bike manual a little bit easier. It doesn't really help for much other than that, but it looks really pretty. So I'm just being honest with you guys. I've also got these RaceFace Chester grips in the size small on here, also with that same Cash Money clamp looking really, really sleek. So that's kind of what's going on with the Cockpit. Another number in addition to the reach and stack ratio that I've been playing around with a ton over the last 2 years is rider area distance. So with this Cockpit setup and those reach and stack numbers, the rider area distance is 86 centimeters and it's at a 61-degree angle. And yeah, pretty comfortable, happy with the fit across all the different bikes that I've been riding and building up over the last 2 years. I'm finding around 86 for a trail bike that I'm not riding like free ride stuff on, so like trying to do flat spins and 360s and things. I find 86 to be a pretty comfortable number. So if rider area distance is something you've experienced with, I'd also love to hear your comments below as I continue to dial in the bike fitting process, because it's a never-ending journey, it seems. And just a last note on bike fit, this thing weighs in at 44 pounds with how I've got it built up. I've seen many people build these up lighter, but for me, got a little bit of a chunky setup going. And yeah, so the 86 centimeter rad with that weight works really well. Sometimes on the full power bikes, I want to go a little bit shorter on the rad or just increase the angle, so I have a touch more leverage over the front end of the bike given the increased weight. But this, I guess, just comparison of the weight to the rad gives me adequate leverage over the front end of the bike, and I'm able to ride how I want to ride. Taking a look at the rest of the bike now, for wheels, we have RaceFace's Turbine E-MTB specific wheels. These things are dope. I absolutely love both the E-MTB version and the regular version. I've got the regular version on my Delano and my LaSalle, and I've been absolutely thrashing the LaSalle in particular all summer long and have had no issues with these wheels. So really, really impressed with those. For drivetrain, XT derailleur, 1051 cassette, XT shifter, brakes, XTR lever, XTR caliper, resin, pads, 200 mil rotors, front and rear. And for pedals, we have the Shimano same pedals. That's my favorite clipless pedal. 200 mil transfer dropper, Title ES1 seat. And I think that covers all of the details of my Nebo Peak. All in all, this bike has really impressed me. No, I cannot ride absolutely everything on it, but for a 140 mil travel lightweight e-bike, I feel like the ceiling is ridiculously high. I'd be really curious to ride a 140 mil travel e-bike with a full power motor to compare, but in my personal experience, I feel like the lightweight motor on this travel bike is a really great fit. With a 140, 150 mil travel trail bike, you're already expecting something that's gonna be pretty nimble and fun. And I feel like having the lightweight motor paired with those travel numbers just kind of keeps that overall characteristic of an agile and nimble bike. And it just seems like a really great pairing in my experience. And it's that agility and nimbleness that makes me feel so comfortable pushing the limits of this bike. And I've just really enjoyed my time riding it. If you have any questions about my bike setup, please drop a comment down below. I will absolutely get back to you. And if you'd like to watch the bike build of this Nebo, I'll toss that on the screen right now. And we'll see you next week for another upload. Peace.